Emma Parker sat silently in the passenger seat, her tiny newborn daughter Lily asleep in the car seat beside her. Rain tapped gently against the windows as her friend Sarah drove toward the only place Emma thought she could call home, her childhood house. Just 3 weeks earlier, Emma's world had collapsed. Her husband, Daniel, had been killed in a tragic highway accident while returning from work. The loss had shattered her, leaving her emotionally broken and financially overwhelmed. Hospital bills, funeral expenses, and unpaid rent quickly drained their savings. With nowhere else to turn, Emma reluctantly called her mother, Linda. Linda's response had sounded warm enough over the phone. "Come home for now," she'd said. "We'll figure something out." Those words had been the only light Emma had seen in weeks. As Sarah pulled into the familiar driveway, Emma stared at the old 2-story house where she had grown up. Every brick carried memories, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and evenings spent laughing with her late father, Robert. She whispered softly to Lily, "We're safe now, sweetheart. Grandma will help us." Sarah squeezed Emma's shoulder before helping carry the diaper bag to the front porch. The front door swung open before Emma could knock. Linda stood there with folded arms. Her smile lasted barely a second before disappearing. "You finally made it," as she said flatly. Emma forced a tired smile. "Thank you for letting us stay, Mom." Linda stepped aside just enough for them to enter. The house looked different. New furniture filled the living room, children's toys covered the floor, and several suitcases stood near the staircase. Emma frowned. "What's going on?" Before Linda could answer, Emma's older brother, Jason, walked downstairs carrying a box. Behind him came his wife Melissa and their 2 energetic children. Jason looked surprised. "Oh, you're already here." Emma blinked. "I thought you lived across town." Jason shrugged casually. "We did. We sold our place last week." Melissa smiled without warmth. "This house has plenty of space." Emma's stomach tightened. Something didn't feel right. Linda cleared her throat. "Jason and his family are moving in." Emma looked around the crowded room. "But where will Lily and I stay?" Linda hesitated only briefly. "We'll work something out." Sarah noticed Emma's expression and quietly excused herself, promising to call later. Emma hugged her goodbye, suddenly feeling very alone. That evening, Emma unpacked a small suitcase into her old bedroom. Most of her childhood belongings had vanished. Family photographs featuring Emma had been replaced by framed pictures of Jason's family. Even the walls no longer felt familiar. As she rocked Lily to sleep, Emma tried convincing herself everything would be okay. "It's only temporary," she whispered. Downstairs, she heard laughter coming from the dining room. Jason's family enjoyed a large dinner while no one called Emma to join them. She quietly warmed a bottle for Lily and made herself a simple sandwich. Looking out the kitchen window, Emma remembered her father. Robert had always promised both his children would be treated equally. "This house will always be your home," he had told her years ago. Emma smiled sadly at the memory, unaware those words would soon carry far more meaning than she ever imagined. Next morning, Emma woke before sunrise to Lily's soft cries. She gently lifted her daughter from the crib that had been hastily assembled in the corner of her old bedroom. Outside, birds sang as if nothing in the world had changed, but inside the house, Emma felt like a guest rather than family. She quietly carried Lily downstairs, hoping not to disturb anyone. The kitchen was already busy. Melissa stood at the stove making pancakes while Jason scrolled through his phone at the table. Linda poured coffee into her favorite mug. No one greeted Emma. "Good morning," Emma said politely. Melissa glanced over her shoulder. "We've already counted breakfast portions. There aren't enough pancakes." Emma forced a smile. "That's okay. I'll make something later." She reached into the refrigerator only to discover that nearly every shelf had been labeled with sticky notes reading Jason's family. One small corner contained a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. Linda noticed Emma staring. "We've organized everything to avoid confusion," she said. Emma nodded quietly, swallowing the hurt. As Lily began to fuss, Jason sighed loudly. "Can you keep her a little quieter?" The kids stayed up late unpacking. Emma gently rocked the baby. "She's only hungry." Melissa added without looking up, "A baby's cry, we know. Just try not to wake everyone." Emma carried Lily outside onto the back porch instead. Cool morning air brushed against her face as she fed her daughter beneath the old oak tree her father had planted decades earlier. She remembered sitting beneath that same tree as a little girl while Robert pushed her on a swing. "No matter what happens," he had always said, "this place is where you'll always belong." Tears filled Emma's eyes. Later that afternoon, she offered to clean the house, wash dishes, and even babysit Jason's children to show her appreciation. Linda accepted every offer without a word of thanks. By evening, Emma had vacuumed every room, folded 3 baskets of laundry, prepared dinner, and put the children to bed. Exhausted, she finally sat down with Lily asleep in her arms. Linda entered the living room. "We need to talk." Emma looked up hopefully. "What about?" Linda folded her arms. "Jason's family needs more space than we expected." Emma's heart began to race. "I can stay in my old room. Lily hardly takes up any space." Linda slowly shook her head. "That's not going to work." Jason and Melissa stepped into the room behind her, avoiding Emma's eyes. Linda took a deep breath before delivering the words that would change everything. "I need you to leave by the end of the week." Emma stared at her mother, unable to believe what she had heard. "Leave?" Jason has 2 children. They deserve stable bedrooms. "And Lily?" Emma whispered. "She's your granddaughter." Linda's face remained emotionless. "I'm sorry, Emma, but your brother's family comes first." Silence filled the room. Emma looked from her mother to Jason, desperately hoping someone would speak up. He didn't. Melissa simply wrapped an arm around Jason as if the decision had already been made. Emma hugged Lily tightly. "I came here because you said this was my home." Linda looked away. "Things change." Emma slowly stood, tears streaming down her face. Without another word, she carried Lily upstairs. As she packed a few baby clothes into a small suitcase, her eyes landed on an old wooden jewelry box hidden behind a stack of dusty books in the closet. It had belonged to her late father. Emma frowned. She didn't remember leaving it there. Curious, she picked it up. Inside was a small brass key. and a folded envelope with her name written across the front in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. Her hands began to tremble. She carefully held the unopened letter against her chest. She had no idea that the envelope contained a secret capable of changing her family's future forever. Emma barely slept that night. Long after everyone else had gone to bed, she sat on the edge of the mattress with Lily sleeping peacefully beside her. The old envelope rested in her hands. Her father's neat handwriting, "If for my Emma," made her chest tighten. Taking a deep breath, she carefully broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small folded document. Emma unfolded the letter first. "My dearest Emma," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to protect you. I pray this letter never becomes necessary, but I know your mother's love for your brother has often clouded her judgment. If she ever makes you feel that this house is no longer your home, you must know the truth." Emma's hands trembled as tears rolled down her cheeks. She continued reading. "Years ago, after watching how differently you and Jason were treated, I made a decision. I quietly arranged for my share of this house to be protected for you. I wanted to make sure you and your future children would always have a safe place to call home." Emma stared at the words in disbelief. She looked at the folded document tucked inside the envelope. It wasn't the property deed, but it listed the name of Robert's longtime attorney, Margaret Collins, along with a handwritten note. "She has everything you need. Trust her." Emma pressed the letter against her heart. "So Dad knew," she whispered through tears. "He knew this day might come." Just then, Lily began to stir. Emma wiped away her tears and smiled at her daughter. "I think Grandpa left us one last gift." The following morning, Emma quietly packed the envelope into her handbag. She avoided everyone downstairs, not wanting another painful conversation. As she reached the front door, Linda stopped her. "Where are you going?" "Out for a little while." "You'll be back to pack your things, right?" Emma looked directly into her mother's eyes. "I'll be back." For the first time since arriving, there was a quiet confidence in her voice. Linda seemed puzzled but said nothing. Emma drove to the address written in her father's letter. It led to a small brick law office that hadn't changed in decades. A polished brass sign outside read, "Margaret Collins, attorney at law." Emma hesitated before walking inside. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" "I'm Emma Parker," as she said softly. "I think my late father asked me to come here if I ever needed help." The receptionist's expression changed immediately. "One moment, please." A minute later, an elegant woman in her 60s stepped into the lobby. The moment she saw Emma, her eyes filled with emotion. "You have Robert's smile," Margaret said gently. Emma nodded. "You knew my father?" Margaret smiled sadly. "For over 30 years." She looked down at the sleeping baby. "And this must be Lily." Emma blinked in surprise. "How do you know her name?" Margaret opened her office door. "Because your father told me about the granddaughter he hoped he'd one day meet." Emma's heart skipped a beat as she stepped inside. Unaware that the answers she had searched for were finally within reach, Margaret closed the office door behind them and invited Emma to sit in a comfortable leather chair. Lily slept peacefully in her stroller beside the desk, completely unaware of the life-changing conversation about to unfold. For a long moment, Margaret simply looked at Emma. "Your father loved you very much," as she said softly. "He came to see me several times during the last year of his life." Emma swallowed hard. "He never told me." "He didn't want to burden you. He hoped this file would never have to be opened." Margaret walked to an old filing cabinet and unlocked the bottom drawer with a small silver key. She removed a thick folder with Parker family written neatly across the front. "This has been waiting for you." Emma's hands trembled as she accepted it. Inside were notarized documents, property records, and several signed letters from her father. Margaret pointed to one document. "Years ago, your father legally transferred his 50% ownership of the house into a family trust. The trust names only one beneficiary." Emma's heart pounded. "Me?" Margaret smiled. "Yes. You." Emma stared at the page, unable to speak. "So, my mother can't simply throw me out?" "Not if these documents are valid, which they are." A wave of relief washed over Emma, quickly followed by sadness. "My own mother chose my brother over me." Margaret reached across the desk and gently squeezed Emma's hand. "Your father's greatest fear wasn't losing the house. It was losing you." Emma lowered her head as tears rolled down her cheeks. "He always told me I'd have a home. He made sure those words would remain true." Margaret handed Emma another sealed envelope. "He instructed me to give you this only if someone tried to force you out." Emma carefully opened it. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Emma, if you're reading this, remember who you are. Don't fight with anger. Fight with truth. The law will protect what love intended." Emma smiled through her tears. "That sounds exactly like him." Margaret nodded. "He was one of the kindest men I've ever known." After composing herself, Emma asked the question that had been haunting her all morning. "What happens now?" Margaret organized the papers into a folder. "Now we verify the current land records, notify everyone with a legal interest in the property, and arrange a formal meeting. No one can make decisions until the documents are presented." Emma looked nervous. "My mother is going to be furious." "Perhaps," Margaret replied calmly. "But facts don't change because people dislike them." For the first time in weeks, Emma felt hope replacing fear. As she prepared to leave, Margaret stopped her. "One more thing." She reached into the folder and removed an old photograph. It showed Robert standing proudly in front of the house with a young Emma sitting on his shoulders, both smiling at the camera. On the back, Robert had written, "Home isn't given by people. It's protected by love." Emma gently traced her father's handwriting with her fingertips. "I won't let you down, Dad." Margaret smiled. "I've already scheduled a meeting for tomorrow afternoon." "With who?" "Your mother or your brother, and everyone whose name appears in these records." Emma took a slow breath. The truth finally comes out tomorrow. Holding Lily close, she stepped out of the law office with renewed strength. Across town, Linda and Jason believed Emma was quietly packing her belongings. Neither of them had the slightest idea that, by the next day, The very house they thought they controlled would become the center of a legal revelation that would change all of their lives forever. Emma barely slept the night before the meeting. She spent the early morning feeding Lily and quietly reading her father's letters one last time. Every sentence reminded her that this wasn't about revenge. It was about honoring the promise her father had made, to ensure she and her child would always have a home. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, Emma walked into Margaret Collins's law office with Lily in her arms and the folder of documents clutched tightly against her chest. A few minutes later, Linda arrived with Jason and Melissa. The moment Linda saw Emma sitting confidently in the waiting room, she frowned. "I thought I told you to be out of my house by today." Emma calmly met her mother's eyes. "I'll discuss everything inside." Jason folded his arms. "This is ridiculous. We all know Mom owns the house." Margaret opened the office door. "Everyone, please come in." The conference room was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock. A large wooden table sat in the center with neatly organized folders placed before each chair. Margaret waited until everyone was seated. "Thank you for coming." Linda sighed impatiently. "I don't know why we're wasting time. My daughter refuses to leave my home." Margaret looked directly at her. "Mrs. Parker, today's meeting is about determining who legally has rights regarding the property." Linda leaned back confidently. "That won't take long." Margaret opened the first folder. "Before we begin, I want everyone to understand that the documents we're reviewing have been legally notarized, registered, and securely stored for several years." Jason exchanged a quick glance with Melissa. Margaret slid copies of several documents across the table. "I encourage everyone to read carefully." Linda skimmed the first page before shaking her head. "I don't understand any of this legal language." Margaret spoke clearly. "Your late husband, Robert Parker, established a family trust 5 years before his passing." Emma remained silent. Linda looked confused. "What trust?" Margaret turned another page. "He transferred his ownership interest in the family home into that trust." Jason frowned. "So?" Margaret continued. "The trust names only one beneficiary." The room became perfectly still. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken. Linda smiled confidently. "Obviously that's me." Margaret slowly shook her head. "No." Linda's smile disappeared. "The sole beneficiary is your daughter, Emma Parker." Silence filled the room. Jason stared at Emma. Melissa's eyes widened. Linda blinked repeatedly. "That's impossible." Margaret calmly placed the notarized trust agreement on the table. It was witnessed, signed, and legally recorded. Linda pushed the papers away. "He would never do that." Emma finally spoke. "He loved both of us." Linda looked at her angrily. "Then why would he leave you the house?" Emma answered softly. "I didn't ask him to." Margaret reached into another folder. Robert also left a personal statement explaining his decision. Linda crossed her arms. "I don't need to hear it." "I'm afraid you do," Margaret replied. She unfolded a handwritten letter. Robert wrote that he feared Emma might one day be treated unfairly and wanted to guarantee she and her future children would always have a safe home. Jason slowly lowered his eyes. The words struck him harder than anyone expected. For the first time, guilt appeared on his face. Emma glanced at her brother, hoping he would finally speak. Instead, he whispered only 4 words. I didn't know this. Emma believed him. She realized that perhaps her father had not been protecting her from Jason. He had been protecting her from someone else entirely. The conference room remained silent. Linda stared at the documents as though they might suddenly change. Her hands trembled as she looked from the trust agreement to Emma. No, she whispered. There has to be a mistake. Margaret calmly shook her head. There isn't. These records have been verified through the County Land Registry. They are legally valid. Linda turned toward Jason. Say something. Jason looked at Emma before answering. I can't, Mom. What do you mean you can't? I never knew Dad did this. Melissa reached for Jason's hand, but he gently pulled away. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about the house. He was thinking about his sister, the one who had arrived with nowhere to go and a newborn in her arms. He lowered his head. Emma. I'm sorry. Emma looked at him quietly. You watched Mom ask Lily and me to leave. I know. You never once asked us to stay. Jason's eyes filled with regret. I should have. I was wrong. The apology couldn't erase the pain, but Emma could see it was genuine. Margaret slid one final document onto the table. Under the terms of the trust, Emma has the legal right to live in the home. She also has authority over how the property is used. Linda stood abruptly. So she's throwing us out now? Emma slowly rose from her chair. No. Everyone looked at her. I know what it feels like to be told you don't belong. I'm not going to do that to anyone. Linda stared in disbelief. You're letting us stay? Emma took a deep breath. There will be conditions. Margaret smiled slightly but remained silent. Emma continued. This house was Dad's dream. He wanted it to be a place where family felt safe, not a place where people were chosen over one another. She turned to her mother. Mom, if you want to live here, you will treat me and Lily with the same love and respect you give Jason's family. Linda lowered her eyes. You'll never again tell my daughter she isn't welcome in her own home. Tears formed in Linda's eyes. For the first time in years, she seemed to realize the depth of the hurt she had caused. I failed you, she whispered. Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the framed family photo Margaret had placed on the table, the one showing Robert smiling with his young daughter on his shoulders. He always believed our family could be better. Jason walked over to Emma. If you'll let me, I'd like to help make things right. Emma nodded. That starts today. A week later, the atmosphere inside the old house had changed completely. The labels on the refrigerator had disappeared. A beautiful nursery had been prepared for Lily. Family dinners once again included everyone at the same table. Jason often helped with the baby while Melissa apologized for her own behavior and gradually earned Emma's trust. Linda still carried the weight of her mistakes, but each day she tried a little harder to rebuild the relationship she had nearly destroyed. One warm afternoon, Emma sat beneath the old oak tree with Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. She unfolded her father's final letter one last time. At the bottom, beneath his signature, was a sentence she had somehow overlooked. "A house is made of wood and stone, but a home is built by the people who choose love every single day." Emma smiled as a gentle breeze rustled the leaves above her. She looked toward the house where laughter echoed through the open windows. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt peace. She kissed Lily's forehead and whispered, "We're home, sweetheart." And somewhere in her heart, she knew her father had kept his promise.